Hello and welcome, my friends. Have you ever heard of Stephen J. Russell? He's considered America's most dangerous criminal, locked up in solitary confinement with no chance of ever leaving. Dozens of police officers monitor him around the clock, and the security measures surrounding his cell are unmatched, even for the most notorious killers and serial offenders in the world. But why all this? Is he really that dangerous? No, my friends. Let me disappoint you. Stephen Russell never used violence. His only crime was embarrassing every police officer in America, making them a laughingstock to every American citizen. He is the master of prison escapes, the king of cons, and the invisible man that prison bars couldn't hold. His escape attempts were so ingenious that even the guards themselves would open the doors for him to walk out to freedom. But how did he end up in prison? What tricks did he use to escape? And how did he end up with a 144-year prison sentence? Known as the King of Cons, his real name is Stephen Russell, but he has dozens of other names and at least 14 known aliases that he used to create fake identities, posing as a judge, a doctor, an FBI agent, and a wealthy businessman, among others. But the most fascinating part of his story, and what made him famous, are his bizarre prison escapes, earning him the title King of Cons. Russell managed to escape 4 times from different prisons in Texas over 5 years. But he wasn't always like this. He started his life as a decent man, even working as a police officer for a while. A childhood shock and a normal life before becoming the King of Cons. Russell was born in 1957 and spent most of his childhood believing he was the biological son of the family he lived with. But at the age of 9, he discovered he was adopted, and that his biological mother had given him up because she didn't want to raise a child out of wedlock. Later, Russell learned that his mother eventually married his biological father, and they had several children together. However, the couple never thought to reclaim their firstborn or contact him at all. This realization shook the boy. Stephen Russell recalls this period of his life, saying, "I felt rejected. I had issues when I found out." He started behaving in extreme ways, getting into frequent fights, setting random objects on fire, and generally engaging in various minor criminal mischief. Russell's adoptive parents didn't know what to do about his behavior, so they tried to curb it by sending him to a boarding school. By his late 30s, he had worked as a volunteer deputy sheriff and seemed to be living a normal life. A psychological shock the King of Cons couldn't handle, although his life seemed relatively typical. His mind was torn, constantly thinking about what his biological parents had done. In 1985, Russell suffered a psychological shock he couldn't handle when his adoptive father passed away. This event made him reflect on his own life, and he decided to quit his job as a police officer. However, he still tried to earn a living honestly. Russell later worked as a sales manager at a food delivery company, but his boss eventually fired him. Russell said about that incident, "Losing my job really messed with my head. I lost control of my life." At that point, Russell decided he would no longer abide by the law or the rules of a society he felt had treated him unfairly. The beginning of a criminal life and an escape plan no one could imagine. The King of Cons started by selling fake Rolex watches, then later scammed an insurance company out of $45,000 by pretending to be severely injured after a fall. Neither of these actions caught the law's attention, but Stephen Russell was first arrested in 1992 after submitting a forged passport application. Russell was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but he wasn't willing to stay behind bars for that long, so he devised a plan to escape. After observing the guards' shift patterns, Russell stole a pair of pants, a shirt, and a tie from the prisoner's personal belongings room. Realizing this outfit wasn't enough to fool the guards, he decided to add a walkie-talkie that the guards typically carried, though no one knows how he obtained it. A few days later, Russell waited for the guards to take a smoke break outside the prison walls. He dressed up, walked behind them, and made his way to the door leading to freedom, soon finding himself on the other side. Russell recounts this unbelievable attempt. My first escape was successful because I used a police radio to tap on the window of the guard responsible for opening the gate. The guards thought I was a police officer. Those first moments of freedom felt incredible. However, Russell's freedom didn't last long. When he tried to commit insurance fraud to raise money, he was caught after being on the loose for nearly 2 years. The king of cons becomes a director at a medical company with no experience after serving his sentence. JayRussell was free again. Instead of defrauding insurance companies and medical companies, he decided to go straight to the source and commit fraud from the inside. He applied for a financial director position at a massive medical management company called NAM, submitting a resume full of lies. He also made sure to include phone numbers and email addresses to verify the information in the resume, all of which led back to him, so he could answer any questions the companies might have. The company officials never suspected that someone could be so bold as to apply with such an impressive resume and not be truthful. After getting the job, Russell embezzled around $800,000 in just 5 months. Ironically, despite having no real experience in such a role, the NAM director later admitted that working with Russell was much easier than with other financial directors, and he seemed to be doing his job well. But stealing $800,000 in about 5 months was bound to be discovered eventually, and the king of cons was arrested again. Tricking the court and escaping from prison disguised as a doctor because of his previous crimes and his earlier escape attempt, the judge decided to increase the penalty until the final trial, setting bail at $900,000. Russell didn't think this judgment was fair, so he decided to reduce the sentence himself. From prison, Russell called the court, impersonated the judge, and used his incredible voice-mimicking ability to ask to be connected to the clerk responsible for setting bail amounts. He then instructed the clerk to reduce Russell's bail to just $45,000. The next day, Russell paid the bail with a bank check and walked out of prison. A few days later, the authorities noticed their mistake, discovering that the check Russell provided was forged, and he was arrested once again. This time, he was sentenced to 45 years in prison. Russell was far from pleased with this sentence, so he devised another devilish plan to escape from prison. Russell started collecting dozens of green markers, and one night, he emptied the green ink from those markers into the sink in his cell. Then he soaked his white prison uniform in the ink, dyeing it the same color as the doctor's scrubs in the prison clinic. A few days later, the king of cons put on his new outfit and walked out once again, as casually as before, through the prison's main gate. The king of cons who embarrassed the authorities contracts a deadly disease. After his story spread, and due to the apparent ease with which he breached prison walls, the media wrote about him, and he became famous in the United States as the king of cons who embarrassed the authorities. But his escape didn't last long either, and the authorities caught him again. However, this time he appeared sad and told the authorities that he had contracted HIV and probably didn't have much time left to live. Over the next 10 months, prison officials watched as Russell became a shadow of his former self, with severe weight loss and all the symptoms of the later stages of the disease. As his condition worsened, he was sent to the prison's care facility. While there, prison officials received a phone call from a doctor informing them that Russell had been selected for an experimental drug trial and needed to be taken to a special hospital for treatment immediately. Thus, Russell was granted medical parole and simply walked out of prison. But 2 weeks later, the prison received another call from the same doctor reporting Russell's death. Of course, Russell was never infected with HIV, but he knew the symptoms well and did everything he could to mimic them. He made sure not to eat much food for several months and took laxatives to lose weight rapidly. As for how he tricked the doctors inside the prison, after they conducted medical tests to confirm his illness, Russell printed fake test results and medical records using a printer inside the prison, ensuring that these health records were placed in the appropriate internal mailbox at the prison. After his escape, He was arrested again while trying to secure a $75,000 loan from a bank, claiming to be a wealthy man. Initially, he tried to deceive the officers who arrested him, insisting that he wasn't the man they were looking for. He seemed so convincing that they almost released him, but it seems that the Department of Criminal Justice had warned them not to listen to anything he said, no matter how believable it seemed. Determined to punish Russell for the embarrassment he caused the authorities over the years, the judge finally sentenced him to 144 years in prison, and he was transferred to a maximum security prison for America's most dangerous criminals. He is still serving his sentence in solitary confinement to this day. Prison officials remain convinced that Russell might be planning to escape again.